The blood on Yates Forrester's hands had barely dried when he saw the woman stretching on her tiptoes, her fingers grasping desperately at the greenery, clinging to the limestone cliff face above the creek. It was June of 1883, and the Arkansas heat made everything shimmer like a mirage, but she was real enough, balanced precariously on a moss-slicked boulder with water rushing past her boots. He had been washing the evidence of a bar fight from his knuckles in that same creek, nursing bruised ribs and a split lip, when her frustrated sound carried across the water to where his horse stood drinking. Yates was 26 years old and had been drifting through the Ozark Hills for 3 months, taking odd jobs on ranches and avoiding questions about where he had come from. The last thing he needed was to get involved with anyone in Bentonville, Arkansas, but something about the determined set of her shoulders and the way she refused to give up, despite the dangerous position, made him forget his usual caution. He waded across the creek without bothering to empty his boots, water soaking through his denim as he approached. "Those plants worth breaking your neck over?" he called out, startling her enough that she wobbled. He moved faster, closing the distance between them in 3 long strides, reaching the boulder just as her foot slipped on the wet stone. She caught herself with a gasp, gripping the rough rock face with her free hand. When she turned to look at him, he found himself staring into eyes the color of honey and sunlight, set in a face that was more interesting than pretty, with a stubborn chin and full lips pressed together in concentration. She was younger than him, probably 22 or 23, with dark auburn hair tied back in a practical braid that had come loose in places. Her dress was simple calico, faded from many washings, and there was dirt under her fingernails that spoke of hard work rather than vanity. "They are worth it," she said firmly, her voice carrying the soft accent of someone raised in these hills. "That is mountain mint up there, and my sister needs it. She has been feverish for 2 days, and Dr. Patterson is 3 counties away treating an outbreak of scarlet fever. So, yes, I would say it is worth the risk." Yates studied the ledge she had been reaching for, measuring the distance with his eyes. The mint grew in a thick cluster about 8 feet up, well out of her reach, but easily accessible if someone could get higher. The boulder she stood on was the tallest thing nearby, and climbing the cliff itself would be foolish with the loose shale that covered its surface. "Step back," he said, moving onto the boulder beside her. It was barely large enough for both of them, and he was acutely aware of how close she stood, how her breath came quick from exertion and fear. "I am going to lift you up. You can reach it that way." She looked at him skeptically, taking in his bruised face and the blood still staining his shirt collar. "You are hurt." "Not so hurt I cannot hold a woman up for a minute," he replied, annoyed that she had noticed. "Unless you weigh more than a sack of grain, we should manage just fine." Her eyes narrowed at that, but she was practical enough to recognize help when it was offered. "My name is Sarah Lockwood," she said, as if sharing her name would make it less improper for a strange man to put his hands on her. "I live at the Lockwood farm, 2 miles east of town. If you drop me and I drown in this creek, people will know who to hunt down." Despite everything, Yates felt his mouth twitch toward a smile. "Yates Forrester," he said, "and I give you my word I will not drop you. Miss Lockwood?" He bent slightly, lacing his fingers together to create a step for her boot. Sarah hesitated only a moment before placing her hand on his shoulder for balance and stepping into his cupped palms. She was lighter than he expected, all lean muscle and determination, but lifting her still sent a sharp pain through his bruised ribs that he had to ignore. He straightened slowly, raising her up until she was high enough to reach the ledge. "I have got it," she said breathlessly, and he could feel her shifting her weight as she stretched upward. Her other hand gripped his shoulder tighter, her fingers digging in through the fabric of his shirt. He kept his grip steady, his muscles trembling slightly from the effort of holding her aloft, while keeping his own balance on the slippery boulder. The creek rushed past below them, and he was intensely aware that if either of them fell, they would both go down together. "There are more up here than I thought," Sarah said above him, her voice excited now. "Can you hold on a bit longer?" "Take what you need," Yates replied, though his ribs were screaming in protest. He could hear her gathering the plants, the soft rustling of leaves, and her pleased murmurs as she found what she was looking for. Her dress hem brushed against his face, smelling of soap and sunshine, and the green growing things she spent her days tending. It had been a long time since Yates had been this close to a woman who was not working in a saloon, and something about the innocent domesticity of the moment made his chest ache worse than his injured ribs. "Got it," Sarah announced triumphantly, and he carefully lowered her back down. When her feet touched the boulder again, she was clutching a substantial bundle of the fragrant mint, her face flushed with success and exertion. She looked up at him with genuine gratitude warming those honey-colored eyes. "Thank you, Mr. Forrester. You may have just saved my sister's life." "Just Yates," he said automatically, then stepped off the boulder before she could ask any of the questions he could see forming behind her expression. "You should get that to her while it is fresh." But Sarah was already studying his face with more attention, and he knew what she was seeing. The split lip was swelling now, and his left eye would be purple by tomorrow. His knuckles were scraped raw, and there was a bruise darkening along his jaw. He looked like exactly what he was, a drifter who had been in a fight, the kind of man respectable women crossed the street to avoid. "You need tending too," Sarah said firmly, her tone brooking no argument. It was the same voice she probably used on stubborn livestock, and it startled a genuine laugh out of him that immediately made him wince. "Do not laugh. You likely cracked a rib. Come back to the farm with me. It is the least I can do after you helped me, and I have salve that will keep that lip from getting infected." "I am fine," Yates said, but even he did not sound convincing. His ribs hurt with every breath, and he was starting to feel the delayed effects of the adrenaline wearing off. The fight in town had been stupid, just some drunk ranch hand who had taken offense at the way Yates looked at him, but it had been vicious while it lasted. "You are not fine, you are being stubborn," Sarah countered, already moving toward the bank where she had left a canvas gathering bag. She tucked the mint carefully inside, then turned back to him with her hands on her hips. "Look, Mr. Forrester, Yates, whoever you are, I am not going to let you ride off and fall out of your saddle from a punctured lung when you just did me a significant kindness. That would sit poorly on my conscience. So please, come let me at least check those ribs and clean up your face. Then you can ride wherever you were going, and I will never trouble you again." There were a dozen reasons he should refuse. Getting involved with locals, letting anyone know his name, staying in one place long enough for people to remember his face, all of it went against the instincts that had kept him alive and free for the past 3 months. But his ribs genuinely hurt, and there was something about Sarah Lockwood's practical kindness that made him want to accept, just this once, just for an hour. 1 hour, he heard himself saying. Then I need to be moving on. Sarah's expression suggested she did not believe the moving on part, but she just nodded and led the way back toward where both their horses were grazing. His was a sturdy buckskin gelding he had won in a card game in Springfield, Missouri, and hers was an elderly gray mare with kind eyes and mud on her fetlocks. They mounted up and rode in silence for a while, following the creek east until it curved away from the road. The Lockwood farm appeared gradually through the oak and hickory trees, a modest homestead with a white painted house that had seen better days, a barn that leaned slightly to one side, and fields that showed signs of careful tending despite limited resources. Chickens scattered as they rode into the yard, and a hound dog announced their arrival with enthusiastic barking until Sarah called him to heel. "That is General," she said with obvious affection as the dog bounded over, his tail wagging so hard his whole body wiggled. "He is supposed to be a guard dog, but he has never met a stranger he did not immediately love." Yates dismounted carefully, letting General sniff his hand before scratching behind the dog's ears. The simple gesture of friendliness from the animal settled something anxious in his chest, a feeling he had not realized he was carrying until it eased. The front door opened before they reached it, and a girl of perhaps 19 appeared, wrapped in a quilt despite the summer heat. Her resemblance to Sarah was strong enough that she could only be the sick sister, though her face was pale and drawn, her eyes glassy with fever. "Sarah, you have been gone hours," the girl said, her voice hoarse. "I was beginning to worry." "I am fine, Melissa, more than fine. I found the mint," Sarah said, rushing forward to take her sister's arm. "And I brought help. This is Yates Forrester. He is going to let me check his injuries, and then he will be on his way." Melissa's fevered gaze swept over Yates, taking in his battered appearance with concern. "You look like you need checking more than most. Come in, please. Any friend of Sarah's is welcome here." "We just met," Yates felt compelled to point out, but he followed them inside anyway, leaving his hat by the door out of deeply ingrained habit. The interior of the house was clean but sparse, with furniture that had been well cared for over many years and walls that could use fresh paint. Everything spoke of people who worked hard but had little money, who made do and made every penny stretch as far as it would go. Sarah settled Melissa into a rocking chair by the cold fireplace, wrapping the quilt more securely around her shoulders despite her protests. Then she disappeared into what must be the kitchen, and Yates heard the clank of pots and the sound of water being poured. He stood awkwardly in the center of the main room, unsure whether he should sit or remain standing, acutely aware that he was dripping creek water onto their floor. "Sarah says you helped her reach some plants on a cliff," Melissa said, studying him with more alertness than her fever should have allowed. "That was kind of you." "She was going to fall," Yates replied simply. "Anyone would have done the same." "No," Melissa said thoughtfully. "Not anyone. Most men in this county would have watched to see if she fell, then argued about who would fish her out of the creek. You are not from around here." It was not quite a question, but it invited an answer. Yates chose his words carefully. "No, I have been working ranches to the north, drifting mostly. I do not plan to stay in Bentonville long." "That is a shame," Melissa said. And then Sarah returned with a basin of water and an armful of cloths and small jars, saving him from having to respond. "Sit," Sarah ordered, pointing to a straight-backed chair she had pulled out from the table. When Yates complied, she set her supplies on the table and stood in front of him, tilting his face up to the light coming through the window. Her touch was gentle but efficient as she began cleaning the dried blood from his lip and jaw, and he found himself watching her face as she worked, noting the small furrow of concentration between her eyebrows, and the way she bit her lower lip when she was thinking. "This is going to sting," she warned before dabbing something that smelled strongly of herbs onto his split lip. She was right. It stung enough to make his eyes water, but he held still and did not complain. "What were you fighting about?" "Nothing important," Yates said, which was the truth. He could barely remember what the drunk ranch hand had said to start it. "Men," Sarah muttered, but there was no real heat in it. She moved on to examining his eye, her fingers feather light as they traced the swelling. "You are going to have quite the bruise there. Let me see your hands." He held them out, palms up, and she cleaned the scraped knuckles with the same careful attention. Her own hands were work-roughened, the hands of someone who spent her days digging in soil and hauling water and doing the 1,000 tasks required to keep a farm running. There was a scar across her left palm, old and faded, shaped like the kind of wound you got from a knife slipping while you were working. "Now the ribs," Sarah said, and there was a slight change in her voice, a hint of awkwardness that had not been there before. "You will need to remove your shirt." From her chair by the fireplace, Melissa coughed, a wet rattling sound that made Sarah's expression tighten with worry. But the younger sister waved off concern, pulling the quilt up higher. "I am fine. Go ahead, Sarah. Propriety should not stop you from making sure he is not bleeding internally." Yates unbuttoned his shirt slowly, his ribs protesting the movement. When he shrugged out of it, he heard Sarah's sharp intake of breath and knew she was seeing the full extent of the damage. The bruising was already spectacular, spreading across his left side in shades of purple and black. There were older scars, too, marks from a life that had not been easy, but she did not ask about those. Instead, she stepped closer, her expression focused and professional. "This is going to hurt," she said quietly, and then her hands were on his ribcage, probing gently but firmly. He sucked in a breath when she hit a particularly tender spot, and she immediately gentled her touch. "Sorry, I need to make sure nothing is broken all the way through. My father was a doctor before he died, and he taught me some things. Breathe in deep for me." He did, though it made him want to curse. Sarah watched his chest rise and fall, her fingers still resting against his ribs, feeling for anything wrong in the way they moved. After a moment, she stepped back, relief evident on her face. "Bruised badly, but I do not think anything is cracked through. You need to wrap them, though, and you should not be riding hard for at least a week." She turned to retrieve a long strip of cloth from her supplies, then paused. "This will require wrapping around your whole chest. I can show you how to do it yourself if you prefer." "I would appreciate your help," Yates said honestly. He had wrapped his own injuries before, but doing it properly was difficult alone, and something about the way Sarah approached the task made him trust her skill. She moved behind him, and he felt the cloth wrap around his torso, just below his arms. Her movements were sure and practiced as she wound it around him several times, pulling it snug but not too tight, securing his ribs without restricting his breathing. He could feel the warmth of her body close behind him, could smell the mint and sunshine scent that clung to her hair. When she leaned forward to pass the cloth around his front, her cheek nearly brushed his shoulder, and he found himself holding very still, hyper-aware of every point where they almost touched. "There," Sarah said finally, tying off the bandage and stepping back. "That should help. You really should rest for a few days before riding on. Let those ribs start healing." "I will be fine," Yates said, reaching for his shirt. But when he tried to lift his arms to put it on, his ribs seized up in a way that made his vision gray at the edges. Sarah caught the shirt before it fell, her expression knowing. "You are not fine, and you are not going anywhere today," she said with finality. "It is already getting late, and you can barely move. You can sleep in the barn tonight, and we will see how you feel in the morning." Yates wanted to argue, but his body was betraying him. The adrenaline had long since worn off, and now that Sarah had cleaned and tended his injuries, the full weight of exhaustion was settling over him like a heavy blanket. The truth was, he did not know if he could mount his horse right now, let alone ride anywhere. "The barn," he agreed reluctantly, "and I will be gone by dawn." "We will see," Sarah said, in a tone that suggested she had her doubts. She helped him back into his shirt, her movements brisk and practical now. "Melissa, I am going to make tea with the mint. You need to drink as much as you can, and I'm going to make a poultice for your chest as well." The rest of the evening passed in a strange domestic rhythm that Yates had not experienced in years. Sarah prepared the mint tea and fussed over her sister while he sat at the table, too sore to do much else. When Melissa's fever broke around sunset, her forehead finally cooling and her breathing coming easier, Sarah actually cried with relief, tears streaming down her face as she pressed her hands over her mouth to muffle the sound. Without thinking, Yates stood and crossed to where she stood by the kitchen counter, her shoulders shaking with the force of suppressed sobs. He put a hand on her shoulder, a gesture meant to comfort, and she turned into it, her forehead coming to rest against his chest just above the wrapped ribs. He froze, uncertain, then slowly brought his arms up to hold her, while she cried out her fear and relief into his shirt. "I am sorry," Sarah gasped after a moment, pulling back and wiping at her eyes. She is all I have left, and I was so scared, and you do not want to hear about this." "I do not mind," Yates said, and realized he meant it. There was something about this woman, this stubborn, determined woman who climbed dangerous rocks for medicine and cried with relief when her sister's fever broke, that made him want to stay, want to help, want to be someone worth knowing. Sarah made dinner, simple fare of cornbread and beans and the last of a smoked ham, but it tasted better than anything Yates had eaten in months. They ate mostly in silence, though Melissa rallied enough to join them at the table, wrapped in her quilt and drinking cup after cup of the mint tea. As the sun set and the light faded to purple outside the windows, Sarah finally showed him out to the barn with a lantern to light the way. The barn was tidy despite its age, with fresh straw in the stalls and his horse already bedded down comfortably next to the old gray mare. Sarah had brought blankets, real blankets from the house, and she helped him arrange them in the hayloft where it would be warmest. "Thank you," Yates said as she turned to leave, "for all of this. You did not have to do any of it." Sarah paused on the ladder, her face turned up toward him in the lantern light. "You helped me when you had no reason to," she said simply. "When you were already hurt and had every reason to just keep riding. That kind of kindness should be repaid. Besides, I think maybe you are not used to people being kind to you, Yates Forrester, and that seems like something that should change." She was gone before he could respond, taking the lantern with her and leaving him alone in the dark barn with only the soft sounds of the horses below and his own confused thoughts. He lay back on the blankets, staring up at the dark rafters, and tried to remember the last time someone had seen him as anything other than a hired hand or a stranger to be wary of, or a body to warm a bed for money. Sarah Lockwood looked at him and saw someone worth helping, someone worth crying in front of, someone worth trusting in her home with her sick sister. The realization sat strange and uncomfortable in his chest, mixing with feelings he had no business entertaining about a respectable woman in a town he would be leaving. Sleep came slowly, and when it did, his dreams were full of honey-colored eyes and the scent of mint and sunshine. When Yates woke, dawn light was filtering through the gaps in the barn walls, painting everything in shades of pink and gold. His ribs hurt less than they had the night before, a dull ache rather than the sharp stabbing pain of yesterday. He sat up carefully, testing his range of motion, and was relieved to find he could move without wanting to pass out. Sarah's bandaging had been expertly done, and a night of rest had worked wonders. He climbed down from the hayloft and tended to his horse, checking the gelding's hooves and running a hand along his legs to make sure he was sound. The barn door opened while he was working, and Sarah appeared with a basket over her arm, and that same determined expression she had worn while reaching for the mint. "Good morning," she said, setting the basket on a barrel. "I brought breakfast. How are your ribs?" "Better," Yates admitted. "You were right about the rest. I appreciate the barn and the blankets and everything else." "Good. Then you will appreciate that I have a proposition for you," Sarah said, and there was something nervous in the way she said it, as though she had been rehearsing this conversation. "I need help around the farm. Melissa has been sick, and before that she was recovering from a twisted ankle, and it has just been the two of us trying to keep everything running since our father died last winter. The work is getting away from us. I cannot afford to pay much, but I can offer room and board, and I can continue tending those ribs until they are properly healed. If you were planning to drift anyway, you could drift here for a few weeks just as easily as anywhere else." Yates stared at her, trying to parse what she was really offering and what she might want in return. In his experience, offers that seemed too good to be true usually were. "Why would you do that? You do not know anything about me." "I know you helped me yesterday without asking for anything in return," Sarah said firmly. "I know you are hurt and you probably should not be riding hard yet. I know you treated Melissa and me with respect, which is more than I can say for most of the men around here. And I know I am desperate enough for help that I am willing to take a chance. So, what do you say, Yates Forrester? Will you stay for a few weeks and help us?" He should say no. Every instinct screamed at him to mount up and ride out before he got attached, before anyone started asking questions he could not answer, before he brought his trouble down on these two women who had been nothing but kind to him. But his ribs hurt, and he was tired of running, and something about the hope in Sarah's eyes made him want to be the kind of man who could stay, who could help, who could be trusted. 2 weeks, he heard himself say. "I will stay for 2 weeks, help you catch up on the work. But then, I have to move on." The smile that broke across Sarah's face was worth every misgiving, bright and genuine, and full of relief. 2 weeks, she agreed, sticking out her hand to shake on it like a man would. He took it, feeling the calluses on her palm press against his own, and wondered what he had just gotten himself into. Those first few days on the Lockwood farm passed in a blur of hard work and surprising domesticity. There was more that needed doing than two women could possibly manage alone, and Yates found himself falling into a rhythm of tasks that started before dawn and ended after sunset. He repaired the fence in the west pasture where the posts had rotted through, replaced missing shingles on the barn roof, mucked out stalls, and helped Sarah weed the kitchen garden that provided most of their vegetables. Melissa recovered quickly once the fever broke, regaining her strength and her natural cheerfulness. She was different from Sarah, more openly friendly and talkative, with a quick laugh that rang out across the farmyard when something amused her. She treated Yates like a brother from the start, teasing him about his taciturn nature and trying to coax stories out of him about his travels. Sarah was more reserved, working alongside him with focused determination, but he caught her watching him sometimes when she thought he was not looking. There was a question in her eyes that she never quite voiced, a curiosity that went beyond simple gratitude for his help. He tried not to think too much about what it might mean. The work was satisfying in a way he had almost forgotten. There was something good about fixing things, about making tangible improvements to the farm and seeing the results of his labor. The fence stood straight and strong, the barn no longer leaked when it rained, and the garden flourished under their combined care. In the evenings, they ate together at the kitchen table, and sometimes Melissa would play the old piano in the corner, filling the house with music that made Yates's chest ache with longing for something he could not name. On the 5th day, Sarah approached him while he was working on the barn door, which had been sticking. She had a pitcher of water and 2 cups, and she sat down on an overturned bucket without preamble, watching him work. "You are good at this," she observed, pouring water and handing him a cup. "The fixing things, I mean. Did you grow up on a farm?" Yates drank deeply before answering, buying himself time to decide how much truth to tell. "My father had a ranch in Texas," he said finally. "I learned young how to handle most repairs. You have to, when you are miles from the nearest town. Why did you leave?" The question was asked gently, without judgment, but it still felt like a knife slipping between his ribs. "He died," Yates said, which was true as far as it went. There was nothing left for me there after that. Sarah nodded slowly, her honey-colored eyes understanding. My father died last December, pneumonia. He was sick for 2 weeks, and then he was just gone. He left us the farm, but he also left debts we did not know about. We have been trying to keep everything going and pay off what he owed, but it is hard with just the two of us. You do not have other family? Anyone who could help? Yates asked, though he could guess the answer. Our mother died when Melissa was born, Sarah said. Father never remarried. We have some cousins in Missouri, but they have their own troubles. It is just us. She said it matter-of-factly, without self-pity, the same way she said everything. Sarah Lockwood was not a woman who wasted time feeling sorry for herself. You are managing well, Yates said, and meant it. The farm was in better shape than many he had seen, despite being understaffed. Your father taught you how to run this place. He taught me everything he knew about medicine and herbs, and some about farming, Sarah agreed. But there is so much I am still learning, like how to keep creditors from taking the land, or how to make enough money to pay the bank and still have something left to live on. She stood, brushing off her skirt. Anyway, I did not come out here to burden you with our problems. I just wanted to say thank you for staying, for helping. It makes a difference. She walked back to the house before he could respond, leaving him holding the cup of water and feeling like he had just been trusted with something precious. The realization made him uneasy. The more he learned about Sarah and Melissa Lockwood, the harder it was going to be to leave. That night, a summer storm rolled through, the kind that turned the sky green and sent the chickens running for shelter. Yates was in the barn checking on the horses when Sarah appeared, soaked to the skin despite the short distance from the house. Lightning flashed, illuminating her face in stark white light, and thunder crashed so close behind it that the barn wall shook. Melissa is afraid of storms, Sarah shouted over the wind. I did not want you to worry if you heard her crying out. Come up here, Yates called back, gesturing to the hayloft. It is drier, and you can wait out the worst of it. She climbed up, her wet dress clinging to her body in a way he tried hard not to notice. They sat side by side on the blankets he had been using as a bed, watching through the open loft door as the storm raged outside. Rain came down in sheets and wind howled through the trees, bending them nearly double. It was the kind of storm that could tear roofs off and uproot trees, and Yates found himself grateful for the solid walls of the barn around them. I love storms, Sarah said suddenly, her voice soft but carrying clearly in the enclosed space. I know I should find them frightening, but I always thought they were beautiful. All that power, all that energy, just breaking open the sky. Yates looked at her, really looked, and saw that her eyes were bright with something like joy as she watched the lightning paint jagged lines across the clouds. Her hair had come loose from its braid, hanging in wet tangles around her face, and there was color in her cheeks from the wind and rain. She looked wild and alive, and entirely at home in the midst of the chaos, and something in his chest twisted painfully at the sight. You are unusual, Sarah Lockwood, he said, and she turned to him with a smile that stole his breath. I will take that as a compliment, she replied. Normal is overrated anyway. They sat together in comfortable silence as the storm gradually moved on, the rain softening to a steady patter and the lightning growing more distant. When it was safe to go out, Sarah stood, squeezing water from her skirt with a rueful laugh. I should get back to Melissa, she said, but thank you for letting me share your view. It was better than watching from the house. Any time, Yates said, and meant it more than he should. The next morning dawned clear and washed clean, the air smelling of petrichor and green growing things. Yates woke to find that the storm had brought down a large branch from the oak tree near the house, missing the roof by mere feet. He spent the morning cutting it up for firewood, working steadily with the axe while Sarah and Melissa hung laundry that had been waiting for a sunny day. It was peaceful, domestic work, and he found himself falling into a dangerous contentment. This was what he had been running from, not the law, not angry men looking for revenge, but this feeling of belonging somewhere, of being part of something stable and good. Because belonging meant having something to lose, and loss was something Yates Forrester knew too well. On the 10th day, Sarah asked him to go with her into Bentonville to pick up supplies. It was a request that surprised him, given how carefully he had been avoiding town, but she needed help carrying everything, and Melissa was not yet strong enough for a long wagon ride. He agreed reluctantly, pulling his hat low over his eyes as they drove the old wagon down the rutted road toward town. Bentonville in 1883 was a growing community with a main street lined by shops and businesses that served the surrounding farms and ranches. The general store was busy when they arrived, full of farmers and their wives doing their weekly shopping. Yates helped Sarah load supplies into the wagon, sacks of flour and sugar, nails and tools, fabric for new dresses that Melissa needed. He was acutely aware of the curious looks they drew, the way people stared at him, and then at Sarah, clearly speculating about their relationship. "Do not mind them," Sarah muttered as they loaded the last of the supplies. "Small town, small minds. They will find something else to talk about by next week." But Yates minded. He minded the way the clerk in the general store had looked at Sarah, like she was doing something shameful by bringing a strange man to town. He minded the whispers that followed them down the street, the way women pulled their skirts aside as they passed. Most of all, he minded that being seen with him might damage Sarah's reputation, might make life harder for her in a community where reputation was everything. They were loading the last sack when a man approached, tall and well-dressed, with the kind of confidence that came from money and position. He touched his hat to Sarah with exaggerated politeness, his eyes sweeping over Yates dismissively. "Miss Lockwood, I did not expect to see you in town today," the man said smoothly. "I was planning to ride out to your farm later this week to discuss our business." "Mr. Henderson," Sarah replied, her voice carefully neutral. "I was not aware we had business to discuss." "Ah, but we do," Henderson said, and there was something predatory in his smile. "It has been several months since your last payment on your father's debts. The bank is growing concerned." Yates saw Sarah's jaw tighten, saw the way her hands clenched on the wagon rail. "I am aware of the timeline, Mr. Henderson. I will have the payment by the end of the month, as we agreed." "The end of the month," Henderson repeated thoughtfully. "That is 3 weeks away, Miss Lockwood. And I must tell you, the bank has received an offer to purchase your property, a very generous offer. Perhaps you should consider selling before the debt becomes unmanageable." "The farm is not for sale," Sarah said firmly. "It is my home, and my sister's home, and I will find a way to pay what we owe." Henderson's eyes flicked to Yates, assessing and finding him wanting. "And who is this? Have you taken on a hired hand? That seems unwise, adding to your expenses when you can barely meet your current obligations." "My arrangements are none of your concern," Sarah said, her voice cold enough to frost glass. "Now, if you will excuse us, we have a long drive home." She climbed onto the wagon seat without waiting for help, leaving Yates to swing up beside her and take the reins. As they pulled away, he could feel Henderson's eyes boring into his back, could sense the threat implicit in the man's smile. They were well out of town before Sarah spoke again, her voice tight with suppressed anger. "That was Richard Henderson. He works for the bank, but he also buys up properties that go into default and resells them for profit. He has been circling our farm like a vulture since my father died, waiting for us to fail." "How much do you owe?" Yates asked quietly. Sarah laughed, but there was no humor in it. "More than I can easily pay. My father borrowed money to expand the farm, to buy better equipment and more livestock. He thought he would have years to pay it back. Instead, he died, and the bank wants their money. I have been making small payments, but Henderson is right. I am behind. If I do not pay in full by the end of next month, they can take the farm." "How much?" Yates asked again, more firmly this time. She told him a number that made him wince. It was not an impossible sum, but it was more than a struggling farm could easily produce. More than Sarah and Melissa could manage alone, no matter how hard they worked. "There has to be a way," he said, thinking out loud. "What if you sold some livestock, or took in boarders?" "We only have 4 cows and the chickens, and we need them for milk and eggs," Sarah said wearily. "As for boarders, who would want to stay on a failing farm in the middle of nowhere? No, Yates, I have thought of everything. The only thing that would save us now is a miracle, and I stopped believing in those when my father died." They rode in silence for a while, the wagon creaking steadily along the rutted road. Yates turned the problem over in his mind, looking for solutions that did not exist. He had some money saved, but not nearly enough to cover Sarah's debts. And even if he did, she would never accept it. He knew her well enough already to know that. "The 2 weeks will be up in 4 days, Sarah said suddenly, her voice carefully casual. "I suppose you will be moving on, like you planned." Yates looked at her, at the proud set of her shoulders and the way she kept her eyes fixed on the road ahead, refusing to look at him. He thought about leaving, about riding out before he got any more involved in problems that were not his to solve. It would be the smart thing to do, the safe thing. But when he opened his mouth, different words came out. "I could stay longer," he said, "if you still need the help." Sarah turned to him then, surprise and hope warring in her expression. "You would do that? Even knowing we might lose everything in a few weeks anyway?" "I have nowhere else I need to be," Yates said, which was true enough. "And I gave you my word I would help. 2 weeks is not long enough to catch up on everything that needs doing." The smile she gave him was worth every risk, bright and grateful, and tinged with something softer that he did not let himself examine too closely. They finished the drive home in better spirits, and when they unloaded the wagon, Melissa came out to help, her strength nearly fully returned. That evening after dinner, Melissa played the piano while Sarah worked on mending by lamplight, and Yates sat at the table pretending to read an old newspaper, but mostly just watching the two sisters exist in their comfortable routine. This was what a home looked like, he realized. Not just a building, but people who cared about each other, who had built a life together and were fighting to keep it. The thought should have made him want to run. Instead, it made him want to stay. The days that followed fell into an even more comfortable pattern. Yates worked from dawn until dark, tackling larger projects now that the immediate repairs were done. He rebuilt the chicken coop that had been sagging on its foundation, replaced rotten boards in the barn floor, and started work on expanding the kitchen garden so they could grow more vegetables to sell in town. Sarah worked alongside him whenever she could, and he found himself looking forward to those hours when it was just the two of them, working in companionable silence or talking about small things that did not matter. He learned that she was 23, that her favorite color was the deep blue of the sky just before full dark, that she had once dreamed of being a teacher but had given it up to help her father run the farm. She learned that he was good with his hands, that he did not talk much about his past, that he had a dry sense of humor that surprised a laugh out of her when she least expected it. The attraction that had been simmering between them since that first day at the creek was becoming harder to ignore. It lived in the brush of their hands when they passed tools back and forth, in the way his eyes followed her across the farmyard, in the catch of her breath when he stood too close while showing her how to properly swing an axe. They were both careful not to acknowledge it, both aware that acting on it would complicate everything, but the awareness hung between them like summer heat, shimmering and inescapable. On the 15th day, they were working together to harvest the early peas, filling baskets with the sweet, tender pods that would sell well at market. The sun was warm on their backs, and birds sang in the trees around the garden. Sarah was laughing at something Melissa had said, her face tilted up toward the sky, and Yates found himself staring at the line of her throat, at the way the sun turned her auburn hair to burnished copper. "Yates," Sarah said, and he realized she had asked him a question he had not heard. "Are you all right?" "Fine," he said, turning back to the pea plants with more focus than they required. "Just thinking." "About what?" she asked, moving closer. They were alone in the garden, Melissa having gone inside to start lunch, and her proximity made it hard to think about anything except how easy it would be to reach out and touch her. "Nothing important," he lied, and she gave him a look that said she did not believe him, but would not push. They worked in silence for a while longer, and then Sarah's hand brushed his as they both reached for the same plant. Instead of pulling back, she let her fingers rest against his for a long moment, her eyes meeting his, with an expression that was equal parts nervous and hopeful. "Yates," she said softly, "I need to tell you something." His heart was suddenly beating too fast, his ribs tight for a reason that had nothing to do with the old injury. "What is it?" "I do not want you to leave," Sarah said, the words coming out in a rush. "I know you said you were only staying a few weeks, and it has already been longer than that, but I need you to know that you are welcome here, for as long as you want to stay. Longer than that, even." Yates stared at her, trying to understand what she was really saying. "Sarah, I do not think that is a good idea." "Why not?" she asked, and there was hurt in her voice, hurt and confusion. "Have we done something to make you uncomfortable? Is the work not to your liking?" "No, nothing like that," he said quickly. "It is just, I am not the kind of man who stays. I have reasons for moving around, reasons I cannot explain, and if I stay here, I am going to bring trouble down on you eventually. You and Melissa deserve better than that." "Should I not get to decide what I deserve?" Sarah asked, and now there was steel in her voice. "I am not a child, Yates. I am a grown woman running a farm and taking care of my sister and fighting to keep everything my family built. I know trouble when I see it, and I know good things when I see them too. You are a good man. I have seen how hard you work, how respectfully you treat us, how much you have helped with nothing but room and board as payment. Whatever you are running from, whatever trouble you think you will bring, I am willing to take that risk if it means you stay." "You should not have to take that risk," Yates said, but even as he said it, he could feel his resolve crumbling. The truth was he wanted to stay more than he had wanted anything in a long time. He wanted to wake up in the barn loft and know he would spend the day working beside Sarah. He wanted to eat dinner at the kitchen table and listen to Melissa play piano. He wanted to be part of something again, to belong somewhere, to matter to someone. "Let me tell you what I should not have to do," Sarah said, stepping even closer. "I should not have to lose another person I care about. I should not have to run this farm alone with no one to talk to except my sister. I should not have to pretend I do not feel something for you that I have never felt for anyone else. So, please, Yates Forrester, stop trying to protect me from choices I am perfectly capable of making myself, and just tell me the truth. Do you want to stay?" The truth was there in his chest, pressing against his ribs harder than any injury. He had been lying to himself for days, pretending he could walk away when the time came, pretending this was just a job like any other. But Sarah was not just another farmer needing help, and this place was not just another stop on an endless road. She was the woman who had offered him kindness when he was hurt and bleeding. She was honey eyes and determination and laughter that rang out across the fields. She was the feeling of home he had been missing since his father died, and the possibility of a future he had not let himself imagine. "Yes," he said simply. "I want to stay." The smile that broke across Sarah's face was like sunrise, and before either of them could think better of it, she was kissing him. Her lips were soft against his, tasting of sunshine and pea vines and hope, and he found himself cupping her face with hands that were gentle despite their roughness. The kiss was sweet and tentative, a question and an answer all at once, and when they finally pulled apart, both of them were breathing hard. "Oh," Sarah said, her cheeks flushed pink, "I should not have done that." "I am not complaining," Yates said, and was rewarded with another smile. "We should probably talk about this," Sarah said, but she had not moved away, was still standing close enough that he could count the freckles across her nose. "About what it means you staying." "It means I am staying," Yates said firmly, "however long you will have me, and it means I'm going to help you save this farm, whatever it takes." "How?" Sarah asked, pragmatic even now. "We still need to come up with the money for the bank, and we are running out of time." Yates had been thinking about that, turning over possibilities in his mind. What if we expanded the garden even more, planted fast-growing crops we could harvest and sell at market? And I could take on some hired work in town, bring in extra money that way. Between the two of us working, we might be able to make enough to at least buy more time with the bank. "It is risky," Sarah said slowly. "The weather could turn, crops could fail, Henderson could refuse to extend the deadline, but it is more of a plan than I had yesterday." She reached out and took his hand, lacing her fingers through his. "All right, we try, together." "Together," Yates agreed, and the word felt like a promise. They broke the news to Melissa at dinner that night, though from the knowing look she gave them, she had already figured out something had changed. She was delighted by the news that Yates was staying and immediately started planning ways to increase production on the farm. Her enthusiasm was infectious, and soon all three of them were talking over each other, suggesting ideas and refinements. The next few weeks were a blur of backbreaking work. They expanded the garden until it covered nearly an acre, planting every fast-growing vegetable they could think of. Yates took on day work in town when he could find it, loading wagons and repairing fences and doing any job that paid cash. Sarah and Melissa threw themselves into cooking and preserving, turning their produce into jams and pickles and baked goods that Sarah could sell at the weekly market. It was working, slowly but surely. The money jar on the kitchen shelf began to fill, copper and silver coins accumulating one hard-earned piece at a time. They were still short of what they needed, but the gap was closing, and for the first time since her father's death, Sarah allowed herself to hope. During those weeks, Yates and Sarah stole moments together whenever they could. A kiss behind the barn when Melissa was not looking. holding hands as they walked the fence line at sunset. Sitting close together on the porch after dinner, his arm around her shoulders while she leaned into his warmth. It was courtship compressed into stolen minutes, sweet and precious because they both knew how fragile their situation was. One evening, with only 10 days left until the payment was due, Yates finally told Sarah about his past. They were sitting by the creek where they had first met, watching the water catch the last light of day. He had not planned to tell her, had meant to keep it locked away forever, but she deserved to know what she was risking by keeping him around. "My father's ranch was in northern Texas," he began, his voice low. "He built it from nothing, worked himself to the bone to make it succeed. I grew up there, learning the land and the work. When he died 4 years ago, he left it to me." He paused, watching the water flow past, remembering. "I was not ready. I was 22 and thought I knew everything, thought I could run things my way. I made mistakes, hired the wrong men, trusted the wrong people. One of them was stealing from me, and when I confronted him, he pulled a gun." Sarah's hand found his in the growing dark, squeezing gently. "I was faster," Yates continued. "He went down, and I thought that was the end of it. Self-defense, clear as day. But he had a brother who saw things differently, started making accusations, stirring up trouble in town. Before I knew it, half the county thought I was a murderer, and the other half did not care either way. His brother swore he would see me hang, started gathering men to come after me." "So you ran," Sarah said quietly. "I ran," Yates confirmed. "Sold the ranch for less than it was worth and got out. I have been moving ever since, never staying anywhere long enough for word to catch up to me. I told myself it was better that way, safer. But the truth is, I was just scared. Scared to trust anyone, scared to put down roots, scared that if I cared about something, I would just lose it again." "And now?" Sarah asked. "Now I am still scared," Yates admitted. "But I am more scared of losing you than I am of anything else. So I am staying, and if that means facing whatever comes, then that is what I will do." Sarah turned to him, her face serious in the dimming light. "Thank you for telling me. I know it was not easy." She paused, seeming to gather her courage. "I need to tell you something too, about why I am so determined to save the farm." Yates waited, giving her the space to find her words. "My mother died giving birth to Melissa," Sarah said. "I was 4 years old, barely old enough to understand what death meant. My father raised us alone, and he did his best, but he was always sad, always carrying this weight of grief. The only time I saw him truly happy was when he was working the land, building something. He poured all his love into this farm, and after he died, I swore I would not let it go. It is all I have left of him, all I have left of my mother, who I barely remember. Losing it would be like losing them all over again." "We are not going to lose it," Yates said fiercely. "I promise you, Sarah. We are going to find a way." She kissed him then, soft and sweet and full of trust that terrified him because he was not sure he could keep his promise. But he would die trying. That much he knew. With a week left, they still needed more money. Yates took every job he could find, working through meals and late into the night. Sarah sold everything they could spare, every jar of jam and dozen eggs and bundle of vegetables. Melissa baked bread and pies until her hands were cramped and sore, and Yates sold them in town for whatever people would pay. It was not enough. 3 days before the deadline, with the money jar still short of what they needed, Richard Henderson appeared at the farm. He arrived in a fine buggy, dressed like he was going to church, and the smile on his face made Yates want to put a fist through it. "Miss Lockwood," Henderson said, climbing down without waiting for an invitation. "I thought I would save you the trip to town and bring the bad news myself. The bank has reviewed your account, and I am afraid they cannot extend any more credit. The full payment is due in 3 days, or they will begin foreclosure proceedings." "I am aware of the terms," Sarah said coldly, "and I will have your money." Henderson laughed, a patronizing sound that made Yates step closer to Sarah's side. "My dear, you are barely halfway to the amount you owe. Be realistic. Sell me the farm now, and I will give you enough to settle your debts with money left over to start fresh somewhere else. You and your sister could have a good life, without all this struggle." "This is our life," Sarah said, "and it is not for sale." "Such stubborn pride," Henderson said, shaking his head. "It is going to be your downfall, Miss Lockwood. When the bank takes this property, you will get nothing. At least my offer would leave you with something." "The answer is no," Sarah said firmly. "Now please leave my property." Henderson's expression hardened, all pretense of friendliness dropping away. 3 days, he said coldly, and then this farm will be mine one way or another. I suggest you spend that time packing. He climbed back into his buggy and drove away, leaving deep ruts in the yard. Sarah stood rigid, her hands clenched into fists, and Yates could see her fighting back tears of frustration and fear. "We are not giving up," he said quietly. "There are still 3 days. Something could happen." "Like what?" Sarah asked, her voice breaking. "We have tried everything, Yates. There is no more money to be made, nothing left to sell. Maybe Henderson is right. Maybe I am just being stubborn, putting Melissa through all this when we could walk away and start over." "You do not mean that," Yates said, taking her shoulders gently and turning her to face him. "You are the strongest, most determined person I have ever met. You have fought too hard to give up now." "I am tired of fighting," Sarah whispered, and then she was crying, really crying, the tears she had been holding back for months finally breaking free. Yates pulled her close, letting her sob into his chest while he stroked her hair and wished desperately that he could fix this for her. Melissa appeared from the house, her face stricken when she saw her sister crying. "What happened?" "Henderson came by," Yates explained quietly. "He wants her to sell." "Absolutely not," Melissa said fiercely. "We are not giving him the satisfaction. There has to be something we can do." That night, the three of them sat around the kitchen table, counting and recounting the money they had saved. They were still $300 short, a sum that might as well have been $3,000 for all the chance they had of raising it in 3 days. "We could try asking for a loan from someone in town," Melissa suggested. "No one has that kind of money to spare," Sarah said wearily. "And even if they did, why would they risk lending it to us when the bank is already calling in our debts?" "Then we need to think of something else," Yates said. His mind was racing, sorting through possibilities and discarding them just as fast. Then an idea struck him, crazy and risky, but maybe, just maybe possible. "What if we held an auction?" "An auction of what?" Sarah asked. "We do not have anything worth selling that we have not already sold." "Not an auction of things," Yates said slowly, the idea taking shape as he spoke. "An auction of time. We advertise in town that we are offering labor, skilled labor, for anyone who needs it. Farming, building, cooking, preserving, anything we can do. People pay up front for a certain number of days or weeks of work, to be completed after we save the farm. If we can get enough people to buy in, we might raise the money we need." Sarah and Melissa looked at each other, hope dawning on their faces. "That could work," Melissa said excitedly. "There are plenty of people in town who need help but cannot afford to hire full-time workers. If they could buy just a few days here and there, pay now, and get the work later, they might go for it." "It is risky," Sarah said, but her expression was thoughtful. "We would be promising work we might not be able to deliver if the bank takes the farm anyway, and people might not trust us enough to pay up front." "We have to try," Yates said firmly. "What do we have to lose at this point?" The next morning, they rode into Bentonville together and spent what little money they could spare on printing up notices to post around town. Yates did most of the talking, explaining the proposal to anyone who would listen, while Sarah and Melissa handed out flyers and answered questions. The response was mixed. Some people dismissed them outright, unwilling to risk their money on such an uncertain proposition. But others, people who remembered Sarah's father, or who had benefited from Sarah's herbal remedies, or who just wanted to see the small farm succeed against the vulture Henderson, pledged money. By the end of the first day, they had raised $50. By the end of the second day, $120. It was not enough, nowhere near enough, but it was more than they had dared hope for. Word was spreading, and on the morning of the deadline, a steady stream of people began showing up at the farm, pressing coins and bills into Sarah's hands and wishing them luck. Henderson arrived at noon exactly, accompanied by the sheriff and carrying foreclosure papers. His expression when he saw the crowd gathered in the farmyard was priceless, shock and anger warring for dominance. "What is the meaning of this?" he demanded. "The meaning is that we have your money," Sarah said clearly, her voice carrying across the yard. She held up the money jar, now heavy with the community's contributions. "Shall we go inside and count it?" They gathered around the kitchen table, Henderson and the sheriff watching suspiciously as Sarah carefully counted out the bills and coins. Yates stood behind her, his hand resting on her shoulder, barely breathing as the pile of money grew. When she finally finished, Her hands were shaking. $3,462, she announced. More than enough to cover what we owe, with some left over. Henderson's face went purple with rage. This is irregular. How do I know this money is legitimate? Every penny is accounted for, Yates said coldly. If you want to challenge it, you can do so with the bank. Otherwise, Miss Lockwood has fulfilled the terms of her loan, and you need to provide a receipt showing the debt is paid in full. The sheriff, who had been watching the proceedings with interest, finally spoke up. Seems to me these folks have done what they needed to do, Henderson. Write them their receipt and let us be on our way. Defeated and furious, Henderson had no choice but to comply. He wrote out the receipt with angry slashes of his pen, then stormed out of the house without another word. The sheriff tipped his hat to Sarah with something like respect before following. As soon as they were gone, the farm erupted in celebration. The people who had gathered in the yard cheered and applauded, and Melissa was crying happy tears and hugging everyone within reach. Sarah just stood there for a moment, staring at the receipt in her hands like she could not quite believe it was real. Then she turned to Yates, her honey-colored eyes bright with tears, and threw herself into his arms. He caught her easily, holding her tight while she laughed and cried at the same time. Around them, people were celebrating and congratulating each other, but Yates only had eyes for Sarah. "We did it," she whispered against his chest. "We actually did it." "You did it," Yates corrected. "You and your stubborn determination and your refusal to give up. I just helped." "You did more than help," Sarah said, pulling back enough to look up at him. "You gave me hope when I had none left. You made me believe we could win. You saved this farm, Yates Forrester, and I am never going to forget that." She kissed him then, right there in front of half of Bentonville, and Yates kissed her back with everything he had. When they finally broke apart, the crowd was cheering again, this time for them, and Yates felt his face heat with embarrassment, but Sarah just laughed, radiant with joy, and tucked herself against his side. The celebration lasted well into the evening, with people bringing food and drink to share, someone producing a fiddle, and dancing breaking out in the farmyard as the sun set. Yates found himself pulled into the festivities, despite his usual reticence, dancing with Melissa and then with Sarah, spinning her around under the darkening sky while she laughed with pure delight. It was full dark before the last of the visitors finally headed home, leaving the three of them alone in the sudden quiet. They sat on the porch steps, exhausted and happy, watching fireflies dance over the fields. "What happens now?" Melissa asked sleepily. "I mean, we have the farm, but we promised a lot of work to a lot of people." "We honor those promises," Sarah said firmly. "Starting next week, we begin fulfilling every commitment we made. It will be hard work, harder than what we have been doing, but we will manage." "We will," Yates agreed. He hesitated, then added, "If you will have me, I would like to stay permanently. Not just as a hired hand, but as a partner. I have some money saved, not much, but enough to invest in improvements to the farm. We could expand, make this place profitable enough that you never have to worry about losing it again." Sarah turned to him, her expression serious. "Are you sure? This is a big commitment, tying yourself to this place, to us." "I am sure," Yates said. "I have been running for years, and I'm tired of it. I want to build something instead, something that lasts, and I want to do it with you, if you will let me." "There is nothing I want more," Sarah said softly and kissed him again, sweet and slow and full of promise. Melissa cleared her throat pointedly. "So, does this mean you two are courting officially? Because if so, I think there are some proprieties we should observe. Like maybe Yates should actually sleep in the house instead of the barn, in the spare room, like a proper boarder." Sarah laughed, a sound of pure happiness. "Yes, I suppose that would be proper. What do you say, Yates? Ready to trade the hayloft for an actual bed?" "Sounds like heaven," Yates replied honestly. The weeks that followed were busy but satisfying. They worked harder than ever, fulfilling the labor commitments they had sold, while also keeping up with the farm's daily needs. But there was joy in the work now, a sense of building towards something instead of just desperately trying to keep their heads above water. The community that had rallied to save the farm continued to support them, spreading word of their reliability and skill. More work came their way, and with it, more income. Yates threw himself into improving the farm, using his savings to buy better tools and materials. He built a new chicken coop that was predator-proof, repaired the leaning barn until it stood straight and strong, and worked with Sarah to plan expansions to their planting fields. In the evenings, he courted Sarah properly, taking walks with her around the property, sitting on the porch talking about their dreams for the future, stealing kisses when Melissa was not watching. By October, when the trees were turning gold and red and the air carried the crisp promise of autumn, Yates knew he was deeply, irrevocably in love with Sarah Lockwood. He had fought against it at first, old instincts warning him not to get attached, but she had worn down his defenses without even trying. She was everything he had not known he was looking for, strong and kind and determined, with a laugh that made his heart race and a touch that felt like coming home. On a Sunday afternoon, with Melissa conveniently visiting a friend in town, Yates asked Sarah to take a walk with him down to the creek where they had first met. They sat on the boulder where she had once balanced so precariously, watching the water flow past, and remembering that hot June day that had changed both their lives. "I have been thinking," Yates said, his heart pounding harder than it had during any fight or flight, "about the future, about what I want from life." "And what do you want?" Sarah asked, turning to look at him with those honey-colored eyes that saw through all his defenses. "I want this," Yates said, gesturing around them at the farm, the land, the life they were building. "I want to wake up every morning and work beside you. I want to watch this place thrive and know we built it together. I want to sit on that porch when we are old and gray and remember how we saved it against all odds." He paused, gathering his courage. "And I want to do it all as your husband, if you will have me." He had not brought a ring, had no pretty speech prepared beyond the simple truth of what he felt, but Sarah did not seem to need any of that. Her eyes filled with tears, happy ones this time, and she was nodding before he even finished speaking. "Yes," she said, her voice choked with emotion. "Yes, Yates, of course I will marry you." He kissed her then, pouring 4 months of longing and love into it, and she kissed him back with equal fervor. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, she was laughing through her tears. "I love you," she said, the first time either of them had spoken the words aloud. "I think I have loved you since you lifted me up to reach those plants, since you helped me without asking for anything in return." "I love you too," Yates said, and the words felt like a weight lifting off his chest. "More than I knew I could love anything." They sat together by the creek until the sun began to set, making plans and dreaming about the future. They would marry in the spring, they decided, when the farm was in full bloom and they could celebrate properly. Melissa would stand up with Sarah, and they would invite the whole community that had helped them save the farm. It would be a new beginning, not just for them, but for the life they were building together. When they finally headed back to the house, hand in hand, they found Melissa waiting on the porch with a knowing smile. "So," she said, "should I start planning a wedding?" "How did you know?" Sarah asked, laughing. "Please," Melissa said. "I have been expecting this for weeks. You two look at each other like you invented love. About time you made it official." The winter passed in a flurry of preparation and planning. Sarah and Melissa sewed a wedding dress from fabric they bought in town, simple but beautiful, with lace they had saved from their mother's wedding gown. Yates worked on building them a proper bedroom onto the side of the house, a place that would be just theirs when they married. The work was hard but joyful. Every nail driven in board placed a promise of the future they were building. Word of their engagement spread through Bentonville, and to Yates's surprise, people were genuinely happy for them. The community that had helped save the farm seemed invested in the love story that had grown out of that desperate summer, and offers of help poured in. Women offered to help with cooking for the wedding feast. Men offered labor to finish the house addition, and even the preacher offered to perform the ceremony for free. In January, a letter arrived that made Yates's blood run cold. It was from Texas, from a sheriff in the county where his father's ranch had been. The brother of the man he had shot had been arrested for murder, the killing of a traveler in a robbery gone wrong. During questioning, he had confessed to orchestrating false accusations against Yates years ago, admitting that he had known all along the shooting was self-defense, but had wanted revenge anyway. The letter cleared Yates's name completely and offered official apologies for the injustice he had suffered. Yates read the letter 3 times, hardly daring to believe it. He was free. The shadow that had been following him for years was gone, lifted by the confession of a man driven by guilt to finally tell the truth. He could stay in Bentonville without fear, could marry Sarah without worrying that his past would catch up to them, could build a life without constantly looking over his shoulder. When he showed Sarah the letter, she cried again, but this time it was with relief and joy. "Now nothing stands in our way," she said, holding him tight. "We can truly start fresh, both of us." They were married on a beautiful April morning in 1884, with wildflowers blooming across the fields and the whole community gathered to witness. Sarah was radiant in her mother's lace, and Yates had never felt more proud than when he stood beside her and promised to love and cherish her for all the days of his life. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, and Yates kissed his bride, the cheers could be heard all the way to town. The celebration lasted all day and into the night, with food and music and dancing under the stars. But eventually, the guests went home, and Yates carried Sarah over the threshold of their new bedroom, setting her down gently and marveling that this beautiful, stubborn, wonderful woman was now his wife. "Happy?" he asked, brushing a strand of auburn hair back from her face. "Happier than I ever imagined possible," Sarah replied, pulling him close. "Thank you for stopping that day at the creek. Thank you for lifting me up. Thank you for staying. Thank you for letting me," Yates said, and kissed her until words were no longer necessary. The years that followed were full and rich, marked by hard work and simple joys. The farm prospered under their joint management, growing and expanding until it was one of the most successful in the county. They paid off the last of the debts and even had money left over to save and invest. Melissa eventually married a kind farmer from the next county over, but she stayed close, visiting often with her growing family. In the fall of 1885, Sarah gave birth to their first child, a boy they named James after Yates's father. He was strong and healthy, with his mother's honey-colored eyes and his father's dark hair, and holding him in his arms, Yates felt a completeness he had never known existed. 2 years later came a daughter they named Emma, fierce and determined from the moment she arrived, and then another son, Daniel, gentle and thoughtful, born in the spring of 1889. Yates had never imagined he could be this happy, that life could be this good. There were hard times, of course, years when the crops did not do as well, or illness swept through the livestock. But they faced everything together, Sarah's determination matching his steady perseverance, and they always found a way through. On summer evenings, when the work was done and the children were asleep, Yates and Sarah would sit on the porch they had rebuilt together, his arm around her shoulders while they watched the sun set over their fields. Sometimes they would walk down to the creek where they had first met, sitting on that same boulder and remembering the day that changed everything. "Do you ever regret it?" Sarah asked once, years into their marriage. "Giving up your wandering ways, settling down here?" "Not for a single moment," Yates replied honestly. "I spent years running from a past I could not change, thinking I had to keep moving to survive. But you taught me that real strength is in staying, in building something that lasts, in loving someone enough to fight for them, and for the life you create together. You saved me, Sarah, just as much as I helped save this farm." "We saved each other," Sarah corrected, leaning into his warmth. "And we built something beautiful together." As the years passed and their children grew, the farm continued to thrive. James took to farming naturally, learning everything his father could teach him about working the land. Emma showed her mother's talent for herbs and healing, studying under Sarah and developing her own remedies. Daniel surprised everyone by developing a passion for teaching, eventually becoming a schoolmaster in Bentonville, but always returning home for Sunday dinners. Richard Henderson eventually left Arkansas after a series of failed business ventures, his reputation ruined by his predatory practices. The bank he had worked for was bought out by new ownership that took a more reasonable approach to lending, and the small farms in the area began to prosper as a result. Melissa and her husband bought land adjacent to the Forrester farm, and the two properties essentially operated as one extended family enterprise. Holiday gatherings became legendary events, with cousins running wild through the fields and enough food to feed a small army. Yates watched it all with deep satisfaction, seeing the legacy he and Sarah were building, not just in land and buildings, but in family and community. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Yates surprised Sarah with a gift he had been working on in secret for months. It was a painting done by a traveling artist he had commissioned, showing the creek where they had met. In the painting, a young woman reached up toward plants on a high ledge, while a cowboy stood ready to lift her up, frozen in the moment before their lives changed forever. Sarah cried when she saw it, touching the painted figures with gentle fingers. "It is perfect," she whispered. "This is where it all began, where you saved me from falling." "Where you saved me from being lost," Yates corrected, pulling her close. "Everything good in my life started that day by the creek. You, our children, this farm, this community. All of it because you were stubborn enough to climb for some mint and I was foolish enough to stop." "Lucky for both of us that you did," Sarah said, and kissed him with the same passion and love that had marked their first kiss all those years ago. They hung the painting in their bedroom, where they could see it every morning when they woke and every night before sleep. It became a touchstone for them, a reminder of where they had come from and how far they had traveled together. As they grew older, their hair turning gray and their hands becoming more gnarled with age and work, Yates and Sarah remained as devoted to each other as they had been in those first passionate days of courtship. They worked side by side in the garden, moved a little slower, but with the same determination. They sat on the porch in the evenings, holding hands and watching their grandchildren play in the same yard where they had fought so hard to keep their home. On the 40th anniversary of the day they met, Yates took Sarah back to the creek one more time. They were both in their 60s now, their children grown with families of their own, their farm secure and prosperous beyond anything they had dared dream, that desperate summer of 1883. They sat on the boulder, which had become worn smooth by the years and the water, and Yates took his wife's hand. "I have been thinking," he said, echoing the words he had spoken when he proposed, "about everything we have built, everything we have shared, and I realized that the luckiest day of my life was when I saw a stubborn woman reaching for plants she had no business trying to reach on her own." Sarah laughed, the sound rich and full and still capable of making his heart race. "And the luckiest day of my life was when a battered cowboy decided to help instead of riding on by. We have had quite an adventure, have we not?" "The best adventure," Yates agreed, "and I would not change a single moment of it." They sat together by the creek as the sun set, two people who had found each other against all odds and built a life that exceeded all dreams. The farm they had fought so hard to save had become a legacy for their children and grandchildren, a testament to the power of determination and love. And it had all started with a simple act of kindness, a moment of connection between two people who needed each other more than either of them had known. As darkness fell and the stars came out, Yates helped Sarah to her feet with the same gentleness he had shown that first day. And they walked home together, hand in hand, knowing that whatever time they had left would be spent exactly as they wished, together on the land they loved, surrounded by the family they had created and the community that had helped them survive. It was not a life without hardship or sorrow, but it was a good life, a full life, a life built on the foundation of that one moment by a creek when a cowboy lifted a woman up so she could reach what she needed, and in doing so, found everything he had been searching for. Years later, when their children and grandchildren gathered to celebrate their 50th wedding anniversary, someone asked Yates what the secret was to a long and happy marriage. He thought about it for a moment, his hand finding Sarah's automatically, and then smiled. "The secret," he said, "is finding someone worth staying for, someone worth fighting for, someone who makes you want to be better than you thought you could be. And then you hold on tight and you never let go, no matter how hard the storms blow or how difficult the path becomes. You build something together, day by day, choice by choice, until you look back and realize you have created something beautiful that will last long after you are gone." Sarah squeezed his hand and added, "And it helps if they are willing to lift you up when you need to reach higher than you can manage alone." Everyone laughed, and the celebration continued long into the night. But Yates and Sarah slipped away early, walking through their farm in the moonlight, looking at everything they had built together. The house with its many additions, the barn standing straight and strong, the fields that fed their family and their community, the orchards they had planted that now bore abundant fruit. "No regrets?" Sarah asked, the question she had asked many times over the years. "Not a single one," Yates replied, the answer he always gave because it was always true. "Just gratitude for every day I get to spend with you." They lived for many more years, seeing their grandchildren grow and their great-grandchildren born, watching the farm continue to prosper under the care of James and his children. And when they finally passed, within months of each other, as people who have shared a great love often do, they were laid to rest in the small cemetery overlooking the farm, their headstones side by side beneath an oak tree they had planted on their 10th anniversary. The inscription on Yates's stone read simply, He stayed. And on Sarah's, she reached higher. But everyone who had known them understood that together they had built something that would endure, a legacy of love and determination that would inspire generations to come. And it had all begun with a chance encounter by a creek, a woman reaching for something she needed, and a cowboy who decided to help her reach it, never imagining that in lifting her up, he would find everything he had been missing and build a life more rewarding than any he could have imagined in his years of wandering. The farm remained in the family for generations, always cared for, always productive, a living testament to the power of two people who refused to give up on each other or on the dream they shared. And in the house that Yates had built with his own hands, the painting of that first meeting hung for decades, a reminder to everyone who saw it that sometimes the smallest kindness, the simplest gesture of help, can change everything, can build a love that lasts forever, and a life that was worth every struggle to achieve.